Hi everybody, I'm recording this talk, which is a version of a talk I did at FSD conferences about a week ago. And the reason why I'm recording this is because we were a little pushed for time on the day, so I didn't do my full talk on the afternoon. So just want to make this available in case anyone feels like they missed out on that. The title of my talk is Do Whatever You Can to Get Kids to Read. And this quote from Willingham really expresses how I've approached encouraging young people to read for pleasure over the past few years. What I've really tried to do is use a range of different strategies to create that culture of reading in school as well as independently outside of school. Now, one of the reasons why I picked the quotation was because I've not been thinking about this particularly strategically. So preparing this talk has really helped me to pause and reflect on what has succeeded, and hopefully I'll give you a few practical suggestions to take away from this. So first of all, let's look at the data about how many young people actually read for pleasure. Well, these statistics are quite well known. I'm sure many of you will have seen these before. We know that 1 in 11 children say they do not have a reading book at home. We know that that rises to 1 in 8 when the children are disadvantaged. Now, this data is from 2020, and of course you'll know that in kind of March of 2020 we went into lockdown in the UK, and lots of other countries across the world did, and we spent a considerable period of time over the past 2 years in some form of lockdown. And if you think about our young people in our classrooms, just think about how many children that means in each classroom were at home for a large proportion of that time without access to a reading book. So it's not just that they didn't want to read for pleasure outside of school, they may not have had anything to read at home. And I know lots of schools really tried to kind of patch that gap by providing reading books, and there were lots of people who were going around and delivering books and activities for young people to do. But that is a gap that really is going to be really difficult to fill. Then in 2021, the National Literacy Trust did another survey which showed that 3 in 10 children and young people said that they read something daily in their free time. So of course, this then, if we flip it round, means that 7 in 10 young people do not read in their free time. And of course, there's a significant gap in responses between students in receipt of free school meals and those who do not receive free school meals. So again, thinking about our typical classroom, maybe you've got 30 students in a class, that means that 21 of those students do not read regularly in their free time. But why is this a problem? Well, we know that reading widely inside and outside of school has a significant impact on our young people's well-being and success. We know that reading widely allows students to extend their vocabulary and their reading fluency, and that there's a clear link to academic attainment. In terms of vocabulary, it's really important for our young people to see words in context and also to see how malleable those words are, because when they meet them in a dictionary definition, for example, they perhaps don't know how the endings of the words can be changed, for example, or how the same word can be used to mean different things or in different contexts. In terms of reading fluency, I'm not just talking about the speed of students reading, but also how they pause, where they put the intonation. Can they show through their reading aloud that they understand the text that they're engaging with? Therefore, it's for the very practical reason of the impact on academic attainment that we want our students to become readers. It is the foundation of their academic success. But of course, I'm not just talking about data here, because we must remember that ensuring students achieve the grades they require is essential to helping them to participate fully and meaningfully in society. You know, for example, if you've got a year 11 student who misses out on that grade 4, that doesn't just kind of impact your data sheet, but also means that that student's got to resit and kind of go through the whole process of English and maths again. And actually that hampers them in terms of moving on smoothly to their future study. And it can really knock their confidence as well. Linked with this is the idea of cultural capital, so we can teach our young people to succeed in exams, but we also need to give them a wider hinterland of knowledge, which we know will help them in further study, job interviews, employment, and so on. And as I always say to my GCSE classes, the reason I'm passionate about their academic success is not just so that they can have an excellent CV, but that this will open doors for them and will give them the ability to choose their path in life. Over the past few years as well, we've seen a much greater awareness of promoting and safeguarding our students' well-being. And research from the National Literacy Trust demonstrates that reading can be one facet of a healthy lifestyle. This is perhaps because it provides young people with the opportunity to take a break from the stresses and pressures of their lives. Engagement with challenges in fiction as well can help our young people to develop greater empathy and understanding. And connected with this is the imperative to ensure that our students develop a rich world of the imagination and of the mind. The pandemic, I think, has really demonstrated the need for robust and deep mental reserves, and these can be developed through reading. So, for example, during the first lockdown, lots of us will have turned to art or sport or music or reading or writing or whatever our particular activities are. And that probably really helped us to get through those weeks and months, which were really incredibly difficult for a lot of people. And if our young people don't have those reserves, then they will have struggled even more, and then that will impact on their well-being too. So what does a culture of reading for pleasure actually look like then? Well, I currently have two sixth form classes, one in year 12 and one in year 13, and between the two classes there are 22 students. I realise that this is not a statistically reliable example, but I think it is an interesting case study that can help us to think about what strategies of encouraging reading for pleasure will work. So when these students were in year 7 and 8, generally a lot of these students were in my class, and I've kind of seen them all the way through school. I've had a lot of contact with them as they've moved up through the school. And I would say at that point, they weren't keen readers. You know, they didn't really see reading as something that they wanted to do. So in our library lessons, for example, they might have had their book upside down, or they might have been trying to do homework instead of reading. Whereas now, every single student in the class regards themselves as a reader, and it's become part of their individual self-identity and also part of their group identity as well. So they're always talking about reading to me and to each other. Texts flow around the classes, and the same copy is often read by multiple people. And so what we have on the screen here is a kind of image of all the books that my year 12 and 13s and I have read since the start of January this year. What I love about this collection of books is how eclectic it is. So there's no self-consciousness here about literary value or reading canonical texts. The students are just reading everything they can get their hands on. I also love the diversity and the representation in their reading matter. So these students are truly gaining an understanding of how different individuals and groups experience the world. If we zoom in on some of their choices, we can see that some of the students are reading books which are linked to their A-level courses. Others are reading books which are typically canonical. We have some students who are reading books that are inspired by film or TV series. We've got some books which may be popular with slightly younger readers as well. And we have books which the students are looking for information about mythology and classical literature. So I know that this culture I'm describing seems pretty idealistic, but actually it is the reality. My students in sixth form perceive themselves as readers, and they read widely and voraciously. But what has happened to make this shift between what they were like in Key Stage 3 and what they're like in Key Stage 5? Why are these students so passionate about reading, and what factors contributed to this? And am I able to control any of those factors so that I can apply this to other classes as well? Well, to help me think about this, I turned to a journal article, which you can see the reference on the screen there. And if you're interested in reading for pleasure, I really recommend reading this particular article. It's really kind of dovetails with what I've been thinking about. So the title of the article suggests that it's just thinking about students reading in school and lessons, but actually it talks a lot about reading for pleasure as well, and it links those two ideas together, so how scaffolding reading and lessons can encourage students to read for pleasure outside of school as well. And one of my key takeaways from the article was its optimism and its positivity. That data I showed you earlier can seem really bleak reading and really pessimistic, whereas actually Tegmark et al. Argue that there's a dormant potential among a large proportion of students waiting to be awakened by teachers. And if we think of that class of 30, we've maybe got 7 who read for pleasure, we've got 21 who don't. What if we can shift another 7 students, and then we can really start to make a change to the culture in our classrooms? The researchers of this article talk about motivation, and I know we think a lot about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, but actually this article kind of formulates the idea of motivation in a different way. And they argue that students who read regularly see this as part of their own sense of self, and that they have a strong reading concept. Normally this starts to dip, they argue, when students are 2 years into their school life, so maybe age 6 or 7. But actually they say that you can create that in the classroom. They also argue that students' reading self-concept is closely related to their perception of reading difficulty. So if students don't have the resilience and the strategies to overcome challenges that they face when they're reading in the classroom, they're not going to be reading for pleasure outside of school. And earlier on in the conference, a lot of people have talked about how we can scaffold reading in the classroom and how we can equip our young people with different strategies for summarising, for finding out meanings of words, for rereading and overcoming those challenges that they face. And if we do that effectively, then our students are going to be more likely to read outside of the classroom. So how do we do this at FRAM then? Well, first of all, our kind of building of a reading culture starts with transition. It starts in year 7. So on I'm going to talk about year 6. So on our year 6 transition day, which we do in the July of year 6, it's all themed around reading. You can see here our students are taking part in a carousel, which is kind of interacting with copies of books. So we introduce them to FRAM through reading. At the end of that transition day, we give out wrapped copies of books. We give them a summer work pack. So you can see there that the first year we did the 1,000-Year-Old Boy. So all students in that year group received a copy of that. And then in the second year, all the students who were joining us received a copy of The Dog Runner and so on. The booklet on the screen there is available on my website under Key Stage 3. So maybe have a look at that. You can get a copy of that and adapt it for your own schools. Then the induction sessions in September are themed around the book and the pack the students have completed. So it all aligns nicely. Now, some years this has got bigger than others. One particular year we had an author visit and I did a drop-down day which was linked to the novel that they'd read. And it was on the theme of journeys. So that particular year group ended up writing their own novel, which is called Voyages. You can see it there on the screen, which we then kind of put into that summer work pack that we give out to our new students. So our new students not only receive a novel that's been written by a professional author, but also one that's been written by students that they might know who already go to FRAM. Then in terms of year 12, we do something very similar. This is called Blind Date with a Book. We wrap the books up so the students don't know what they're getting and they read this over the summer. And then when they arrive in September, they give a little presentation in their English lessons about the book that they've read over the summer. Kind of pausing and thinking about some of the questions that arise from this then. I know some of you will be thinking about the cost of the books that we give to year 7. I think lots of schools actually do this now. We started 4 years ago, so I think we were slightly ahead of the curve. But I think a lot of schools do this because they really think that it does have an impact and it is worth that financial investment. And there is obviously a big investment of staff time as well. But what's more important to me are the questions at the bottom of the screen. So is the focus on the reading itself, or is the focus on something else? One of the things that I consider is whether the students who do the year 6 transition day, for example, remember that it was about reading, or that they remember that it was good fun. And does that matter, I suppose, if we're evaluating the day? Secondly, one of the questions that I really kind of think is important for us to ask is how effective is the legacy of the project? So when those transition activities end, kind of towards the end of September of year 7, do we have the momentum built up to continue that culture of reading as we go through the year? So what I've been doing now, or more recently, is thinking about how we can use that momentum from the bigger events and use that to find ways to start rich conversations and regular conversations with our students all the way through the year so that we don't lose that focus on reading. And there's some suggestions on the screen there, which I'm just going to talk you through a few of them now. The first one I'm going to talk about is called Book Monday, and my current year 13 students want to patent this. They say that they've invented this. But this is essentially on a Monday's lesson, we would spend 15 minutes at the start of the lesson discussing the books that the students are reading. They often bring a book, so it's a little bit like show and tell, and they talk about why they like it and what they've enjoyed about it. And we all know that students love narrative. So if they're able to see each other as role models and hear little snippets of the narrative in a book, we know that our young people are going to get hooked into reading. And what I do at the moment as well is using this book jar. Now this came about because I don't have a classroom of my own, and I really wanted to have a kind of living display on the walls where I continually put up different pictures of books that students in the classes are reading. I can't do that because I don't have a classroom, so I have a jar instead, which I carry around school. And every time a student reads a book, they tell me, and I put a copy of it into the jar. So this is just a tiny copy of the book, maybe about 2 centimetres tall. I just print off the front cover of the book, concertina some paper, and stick it all together. But the important thing about this is that it could easily become a gimmick. And instead of allowing it to become that, I make sure that we use it as a platform for conversations. So on a Monday, I will bring the jar in. I will have the little copies of the books that students have read recently, and I'll have kind of like a ceremony where we put the books into the jar. And as part of that, I have to insist that the students are explaining about their book, why they liked it, what they enjoyed about it. Just in order to keep this fresh, every so often I do a prize draw. So I'll pull a book out of the jar and the student will get a little prize. And of course, the idea is to fill the jar across the academic year. Now, as I said, there's a worry that this could become gimmicky, and I think the next idea could potentially become gimmicky as well, but it's all about using it as a trigger for those conversations. So this is a bookcase which I've drawn and I'm creating as a waggle for my students. I'm going to launch this in September. And what I want is for my students to draw their own bookcases or to use my template and to use it as a way of visually recording what they're reading. Of course, if you had a tutor group, then you could use this for your tutor group as well. You could blow it up big, put it on the wall, get some students to design it, and record what the tutor group's reading across the year. So what's coming next then? Well, the next step in my vision, in my plan, is that I need to harness our sixth formers' infectious enthusiasm and to use it to inspire our younger students. So in order to do that, I'm going to be setting up a blog for students' book reviews, and I want to do pass on a book. So when we do that blind date with the book at the start of year 12, end of year 11, start of year 12, I want it to come with a personal message from the person who's read it saying, this is what I enjoyed about it, this is why I think this book is really valuable for you to read. So there we go, do whatever you can to get kids to read. Hopefully I've given you some suggestions there about ways that you might do this creatively. But as I say, I think the most important part of this is having those rich, regular conversations with students, continually kind of driving them towards reading and making sure that they understand why they're reading as well, what they can get out of books and how they can enjoy those wonderful narratives that we're able to access.